What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tesseract. This is episode 4 with Mr. Stephen Bassett. We have Prashant back on for this episode, which is amazing. Hey, glad you're back. And what's up, Josh?
What's up, Augustus? I don't know if you want me to introduce Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Stephen Bassett. Stephen Bassett is a political activist, disclosure advocate, and the executive director of Paradigm Research Group, PRG, founded in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind extraterrestrial-related phenomena. He has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of disclosure, the formal confirmation by heads of state of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. He has lectured around the world on the political implications of the UAP ET phenomena and given over 1,200 radio and television interviews. PRG's advocacy work has been extensively covered by national and international media, including being featured on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and in the Washington Post and the New York Times. In 2013, PRG organized and conducted a citizen hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington. In November of 2014, PRG launched a 2-year political initiative out of Washington, D.C. that injected the ET issue into the 2016 presidential campaign. Bassett has appeared in many documentary films and on lectures, and his lectures and interviews are well prepared, are well represented on YouTube. Steve will soon be part of a new project based out of Los Angeles, California, and his website is paradigmresearchgroup.org.
Amazing. Thank you, Josh. Well, welcome to the show, Stephen. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to talk to you about the exopolitics perspective on what we're seeing just last week, even in the Senate hearing. The CIA has recently, through declassified documents published by the U.S. Archives, that the former president of Mexico, Jose Lopez Portillo, who led the country from 1976 to 1982, was a Central Intelligence Agency asset. So the Central Intelligence Agency's grip on disclosure, why do you think that they don't want the general public to be aware of the UFO phenomenon, the ET alien phenomenon, and why hide and cover them up? What's the point for them, and are they covering it up for other nations as well, as we now know that heads of state are actual CIA assets?
Interesting question. Okay. All right, fine. I'll answer it. But before I do, I want to say two things real quick. First, this overarching title, the preservation of the human race, bullseye. That's at the heart of what I do. Secondly, and further, that's going to be pretty much central to my two presentations coming up in June at the Contact in the Desert Conference in Indian Wells Renaissance Resort, southeast of Palm Springs. Contact in the Desert could be a major event, probably 2,000 people, 60 speakers, and I'll be talking about this. And so those that can join us in Indian Wells, June 2 to 4, please come. The level of intensity and excitement is going to be great. The second thing I want to mention is this. Since everybody is on their phone, I assume, mostly, so they easily can access their computer at the same time, my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, Paradigm, hopefully you can spell it because it's going to be a big word in the coming years, paradigmresearchgroup.org. If you go to that website while we're talking today, and you go to, on the menu, Resources, and you scroll down to Print Media Archive, and you select that, you'll go through what amounts to a flash page. Then you punch through that, you get to the archive. This is an archive of now 13,000 linked English language press mainstream articles on this subject, curated from thousands of others, many thousands, most of which are just not that important, a junk or they're fringe or what have you. It is an enormous resource that not that many people know about. And it's searchable by year. In other words, 1 year of articles, you can do a word search on that page and jump to stuff. But lastly, I'll mention that since just December 16th of 2017, which many of you may recall was the day that the first of 2 articles in the New York Times appeared, and the day that those articles went up on the website, along with 3 gun camera footage clips, and marked the turning point, in my view, in the end game of the disclosure process. I have linked nearly 4,000 articles on this subject since just December of 2016. If you want to get an idea of what's going on, you can get it simply by reading what the mainstream press has written. There's no what I would call UAP press in that it's regular journalism. There's plenty of what we'll call UAP or UFO or ET specific journalism. That's not there, right? So take advantage of that. Browse it while we talk. Now, to your questions. Look, in terms of who is an asset to the CIA and who isn't, is not all that, I think, necessarily relevant. God knows how many, quote, assets we have. We have relationships with every country and the head of state of every country. Also, our intelligence community has relationships with the intelligence communities of every country. Now, some countries are not big and not wealthy, and they don't have an intelligence crew. But if they're big enough to have one, we have relationships with them. These are subterranean relationships. In other words, the intel community of the UK or Canada, France, Germany, Brazil, and the United States intelligence community have their own lines of interaction, which, not surprisingly, are conducted secretly. In other words, this is intelligence entities operating in a classified setting, talking to other intelligence agencies in a classified setting, happen to be in another country. Now, this is good and it's bad. It's important that countries have an idea of what they're up to. And a lot of times, often, understanding what another country is up to is not going to necessarily, you're not going to get that by simply calling up the ambassador or reading their newspapers. No, to the extent that they can, the intelligence communities keep in touch to know, let them know certain things. It's appropriate. So there's a confidence between countries so they don't do something stupid like start a war. So a lot of people don't think about this, know about that, but in fact, it's going on all the time. And the same, of course, there's public engagement, and there's public classified engagement, and so forth. This is all part of the politics of the earth. And so who is an asset and who isn't an asset and how these arrangements take place, I don't know. It's just the nature of our world, and I don't get bent out of shape about it. Now, and the only thing that's relevant, I think, about the issue with respect to this particular past Mexican president is that Mexico, the Mexican people, have one of the most intense relationships to this issue of any country in the planet. And of course, in Spanish, it's called OVNI. And so the awareness and interest in OVNIs in Mexico is really big. It might be in terms of per capita, I guess you could say, it might even be higher than the U.S. probably is. And so whatever relationship we have with the Mexican president has some relevance on this issue, though not in the public domain, at least not yet. Now, let's get to the other question, which is it's a big question. Thousands of books, not tens, not hundreds, thousands of books are going to be written about the information relevant to your question. I wish I could write one of them, but I've pretty much been in ADHD since I was like 12, right? I can't sit still long enough to write anything, hardly. So I found my own niche, and that's the internet, where you don't really have to read a big book, but you can stay on it for hours. Here's the best answer I can give you. The decision of the United States government right after World War II which we won and played a fairly important part in winning, along with, I should say, the Soviet Union, right, which was our ally at the time, was not a cover-up. It was a national security policy, and it still is a national security policy. It is not a cover-up because it's legal, and you don't cover up legal things, right? So the term is basically counterproductive. So why did they do it? It's not hard. But in order to, you have to, there is a term out there right now, which I'm really a fan of, though it's used in the context sometimes that are somewhat offensive. But overall, I like this term. It's called presentism. And presentism is the tendency, it's human nature. Try to view what people or nations did in the long past in the context of the way the world is now and the way we think now. And this is just not realistic. So let's apply and avoid the issue of presentism by putting ourselves in the place of the president, the department head of the department, the head of our national security, Department of Defense, certainly in the Army, Air Force, soon to be Air Force, at the time that Roswell took place in July of 1947. They may have had some indication, even a crash vehicle prior to 47 July. It's not out of the question. Cape Girardeau particularly comes to mind. But if they did, it was very narrowly held and very nascent. But it's possible, which doesn't really make that much difference in the point I'm about to make. But in 1947, when a vehicle crashed piloted by non-humans in Roswell, things changed because they put out a press release saying they had it. They had this vehicle. You know, it was, I'm sure in retrospect, they wish they hadn't done that. But Mr. Haught was instructed by Blanchard to put a press release out. We're pretty thrilled that we've got one of these vehicles that people have been seeing flying around, including Kenneth Arnold. And isn't that cool? And wow, maybe the world should know. And they put the press release out, and that literally brought the issue head to head, face to face with government interest, national security interest, whether they wanted it to or not. And so from that moment on, right, two things are true. One, our government, those that have a need to know, and those that have figured it out or been tipped off, and that includes members of the House and Senate and House staff, members of the Air Force, Army, Navy, agency personnel, those who have a need to know, and those who have figured out, have known that there is a non-human intelligence present with technology since no later than July of 1947, period. It's not a guess. It's not an estimate. It is an absolute fact and should always be considered when trying to assess what the hell's going on. So that's one thing we know. And the second thing we know is that the presence of non-human technology is a potential national security threat. I understand there are people that have certain views about ETs and so forth, or just about, in general, that they must be this and they must be that, they must be wonderful, it's all going to work out, and et cetera, et cetera. But look, just common sense says that a high technology, non-human civilization, if they are able to access our world, is a potential threat. And at the time, 1947, the United States and all of its allies were pretty sensitive to the idea of potential threats, though mostly from other humans. So it was instantly treated as a national security matter. I say instantly. It was appropriately treated, and soon as that. And so they made the decision. We're going to deny that press release. We're going to put out a new press release, and then we're going to see what the hell we have here. What can we learn from what we have? What can we learn from the live ET, extraterrestrial and non-human intelligence, that they got from that crash? And then make decisions based upon that while we assess as well what's going on in the real world. And what was going on in the real world is that by 1947, we were already well on our way to the next war. We had a new enemy, our former ally. We had tested and dropped atomic bombs on human beings. Our new adversary also had that technology and was moving as fast as possible to test their own atomic bomb. And we even knew they had the basic understanding of the hydrogen bomb technology, and they would be testing one of those. But it gets worse, because while we got thousands of German scientists, bless their heart, and brought them over here for a comfortable life under the paperclip program, the Russians, or the Soviets rather, had their own paperclip program, and they had thousands, even more thousands of scientists and other high-tech personnel that they brought back to the Soviet Union. And so our advancement in rocket technology was going to be mirrored by them. And so very smart, honest, patriotic Americans in the 1947-48 period concluded that very soon the United States and at least the Soviet Union were going to build missiles, and they were going to put nuclear weapons on them, and then they were going to stare at each other across the oceans and execute diplomacy of some kind or another. That was coming. And it would be, obviously, a really dangerous thing. All of our allies went along with this, however they figured it out or were informed, because we were the United States. We were the most powerful nation on earth. We had defeated the Axis powers, and we clearly were going to be the single most important bulwark to any threat from the rising communist empires of Soviet Union and China. And so the idea that they were going to poke us in the eye or pull a prank on us or just generally oppose this very significant decision was ludicrous. And so they didn't. They went along with it, and they still go along with it. Now, the Soviet Union and China, though China much later, also have been quite content with this truth embargo for one fundamental reason, not because of love of the United States, but because these are authoritarian control states that virtually are able to maintain power by exercising as much control as possible over their people, what they do, how they do it, what they think, and what they say. And so for them, informing, and by the way, the Soviets knew early on. The Soviets even knew about Roswell. When the Chinese found out, I don't really care, but they eventually found out. So it was also known to them from then. The Soviets knew there was an ET present. They realized that just dropping that piece of information into the worldview of their millions of citizens that they were trying to control in every way was not going to be helpful. It was not going to make it easier for them to focus on the all-powerful leader, the great leader, the Mao, the Marx, not Marx, but rather the Marxist, the Maoist, right? And so it would be best if they didn't really do that. While they assessed what the risks were, what these ETs want, and so forth. So they made it a national security matter too. And such was the truth embargo born. And let me add this. I am pretty sure that all those involved in that decision, whether it was in 47, whether it was in 52, and going forward, did not envision we would still be in this position 75 years later. I think, if anything, they envisioned a third world war. And many, I'm sure, thought it was inevitable. In which case, well, it doesn't matter what your national security decisions are in 1947, 49, 50, 51, 52. But it turned out that that's what happened. And the reason it happened was this. While they're assessing the ET situation and learning what they can, and they have been studying, interacting, tracking, and researching crash technology every day of every week of every month of every year since, I can assure you, and spending trillions of dollars in the process, that they, in terms of the developments that took place, what they probably didn't expect, because it seems so ludicrous that what would happen is that these two fundamental ideological groups, the West and the East, capitalists and the communists, would go forward and amass massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons with multiple delivery systems, with advanced versions of these weapons, not just more of them, but more advanced versions, and then and default early on into one of the most amazing and bizarre, I guess you could say, political decisions ever made on this planet, under which we would then operate. In other words, it was a protocol that we would operate under, whether you liked it or not. And what was that protocol? Mutual assured destruction, which has the best acronym of all time, MAD, M-A-D. In other words, the way things evolved is we did not get a third world war, in which case you and we would not be having this discussion right now. What we got was a policy of mutual assured destruction, which was simply this. We have so many weapons, so many ways to deliver them, that any war that were to take place of a nuclear nature would be total annihilation of anything worth using or having. It would be a destruction of cities and nations, environment. It would be catastrophic. And afterwards, nobody would give a damn what anybody's position was on anything. And they would mostly be trying to see if they can live the next 24 hours. And because that is so awful, nobody will do it. That became the operative protocol under which the entire planet was operating since no later than around 1950, which means the lifetime of almost everybody in this clubhouse room right now. We have weapons so awful we can never use them, so we won't. Well, guess what? That was a ruse. It always has been, and a mistake, because we've almost used them 4, 5, 6, 7 times. It may be more than that, but we know of several instances where they were almost launched. And so we've come within inches of nuclear annihilation. You want to talk about the preservation of the species, nuclear on a number of occasions, meaning nuclear mutual assured destruction is a really stupid policy. It's almost an insane policy. And if nations were people, nations would be rounded up and taken to a mental facility where they would be put in rooms and talked to for hours and hours to see if they could be brought out of this kind of madness and become productive citizens of the universe. And yet that has been our lot since 1947. Wow, what a mess. So my point is that what the people that made the initial decision to begin the truth embargo, informally in 1947, formally with the Robertson panel in 1953, and the creation of MJ12, what initiated that decision? What followed is what locked it down, right? In other words, the reason it's still around is that the development of mutual assured destruction and the expansion of nuclear weapon stockpiles in the 80,000s and the number of countries that became nuclear, 8, possibly now 10, was simply, it made it impossible for anyone in the United States government in the defense area, national security area, to make a case for, I think it's time that people should know the truth about this. And so if they raised their hand at a meeting or sent a email or a text or something, that was going straight in the trash can. And anybody that went rogue, meaning, well, I'm going to take it upon myself, I think we need to tell the people the truth, things are not going to go well for them. So that is what has sustained the truth embargo. And I'll finish with this. What needed to be done to confirm to the American people, and thus the world, of the presence of this non-human technology presence, its first opportunity is after Roswell, late 1947. It would have been tricky, but it could have been done. But they passed. The second opportunity was 1953, after the massive overflight of Washington, D.C., which got the attention of everybody in government, I assure you, and led to the Robertson panel. Robertson panel could have made the decision, as some people in government had already intimated, that it's not a major threat. It's not a real threat. It's going to be concerning, but let's tell the people. Let's get this information out, and let's all address this issue together. They chose not to do it. The next opportunity, the next realistic opportunity was many years later, 1993. In 1993, the Cold War was over, and we hadn't started the second Cold War. All right. The nuclear arms race was being dealt with. We had treaties, particularly the START Treaty. Things were getting a little bit better. It looked promising, okay, until we started cranking the nuclear weapons race up again. 1993, window of opportunity. The president was Bill Clinton. The initial instigator was Lawrence Rockefeller, who had a lot of influence, big donor to the Democratic National Committee, friend of the Clintons. Obviously a scion of the Rockefeller family, but a good one, a good guy. He approached the administration with trying to resolve this issue. Let's get the files out. You start getting the files out in any sizable number, and very quickly you're going to have the process underway, and you get disclosure during the Clinton administration. That was the third time. Nothing happened after that. The reasons are, again, going to be written up in thousands of books. And so now we're on the fourth opportunity. Well, it's been said that success is nothing but the end result of a series of failures. The fourth opportunity begins on December the 16th, 2017. And this was the real deal. And it has evolved at a relatively rapid pace for 5 years. People say, well, it's still too long. We waited so long. Let's get this done. I get it. This process that we're seeing now could have already been done by now. It could have happened a lot sooner, but the luck of the draw, okay? Right? The luck of the draw, the luck of history. History goes on regardless of what your intentions are. History is big and powerful. And so during this 5-year period, we have dealt with one of the most politically disruptive eras in the history of the United States. Also, there has been a substantial amount of political disruption around the world. The continued rise of authoritarianism, and of course, the Second Cold War, weapons advancement, and nuclear, and all this. I mean, it's just been not good. And then on top of that, the worst plague, pandemic, in the history of the human race. If you measure it in terms of the total number of infections, the total number of deaths, which doesn't match some previous periods, but only because of our technology. If it weren't for our technology, 100, 200, 300 million people would have been killed by this particular virus. All of that we've had to put up with over the last 3 years. And in spite of it, the process has continued to advance, which is an excellent testimony for just how much this end game is underway. It's like trying to win a chess game while there's grenades going off around you and the air conditioner's off and you're sweating and you can hardly breathe, but you still win the game. That's what's happening right now. And I happen to believe we're reaching the very final stage of it. And the potential for disclosure this year is quite high. That is my short answer to that question.
That was a brilliant take with a lot to unpack. I'm sure we're going to all be revisiting this replay and the subsequent uploads because it was extremely dense in terms of just how much invaluable information was communicated. So thank you for that. And also, thank you for your service. I mean, having dedicated a quarter of a century to this fight is no joke. It's no chump change in terms of a human lifetime.
I have colleagues who have given it 50 years.
and it wouldn't be you wouldn't have done it. I believe it wasn't worth doing. So
Sure.
our sincerest thanks for this matter. We're definitely standing on the shoulders of giants here. But if you wouldn't mind, I wanted to you've covered so much already in this this question that I had prepared for you. Because personally interesting to me because I have some exposure to that world. I used to live in Washington D.C. Worked in the AI field, and I was wondering if you could perhaps comment on the interplay and the sort of impact that this extraterrestrial presence has had on the proliferation, the expansion, and the raw might of the military industrial complex. And I want to add just a little bit more of a nuance there as well. We've forget exactly when. Perhaps it was a couple of months ago, but we ran this another room here in this house, and the title was kind of tongue in cheek, and it was "The United Soviet States of America is the Fourth Reich," which is we. It seems to me in my bones, in a sense. It seems that there's some sort of intimate connection between this extraterrestrial presence, the importation of our paper clippers here, and also with the Soviets, the Cold War, and us turning into this sort of hybrid society in which so much of this technology lies in private hands under government sanction. So if you could, and I'm hearkening to the Wilson memo, which without getting into whether or not it's truly a valid document or not, it still illustrates the potential for so much of this hidden technology, sequestered technology, lying rather than in the hands of the government, but in the hands of private interests, which and that's a perfect recipe for the government to wash its hands clean of any responsibility to disclose, and it's turning us into this sort of. I mean, Mussolini himself said fascism is better termed corporatism is the perfect merger of state and corporate power. So I was wondering if you could unpack that for us.
Obviously, it's not going to be the easy questions today. These are going to be the deep stuff. These are the kinds of questions. God, I wish some university would invite me in, and someone like yourself, erudite, educated, ask questions like this in front of an auditorium full of students and professors. But of course, they won't do that because they're still completely complicit in the truth embargo. Okay. Some of this is my opinion. All right. I'm not sure what that phrase was you used. By the way, you said used to work in AI. I just want to mention right now, there are scores and scores of companies out there raising billions of dollars hand over fist in AI, and the venture capitalists are practically walking the money in without being asked. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, look.
Really quick, I still work. I actually right now work at the intersection of cybersecurity and AI.
Excellent. Okay,
but I was working in the federal contracting context, so that's how I got exposed to that kind of world. And there were a lot of odd things going on there that unanswered questions in my mind. So somebody like you would be the perfect person to help me understand that.
I hope some of this massive venture funding turns up in your world. I want all my friends and colleagues and interested parties to fare well in the coming world. somebody, I think you said something about this, something united, something of Soviet
Yeah,
states.
it was tongue in cheek about how where we're now at, the crossroads at with which we are as
Oh,
a nation, that the United Soviet States of America is the Fourth Reich.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Look, I appreciate that. It is tongue in cheek, and it needs to be because that's not what's happening at all. And I would not want to use that phrase myself. Fascism is fascism, and communism is communism. Authoritarianism is authoritarianism. But the word Soviet refers to strong communist authoritarianism, and that's not what we are. Um, and right now, so this the former Soviet Union is slaughtering people in the Ukraine. Not that we haven't done that too, but not yeah, we haven't done it too. But in this particular case, it's really egregious. In any event, look, here's my answer. This idea that the whole tech issue, the whole ET issue is being now run by private companies is ludicrous, and it's not true. I don't really know. It's one of the number of themes and threads that comes into play that has some merit to it and gets traction, and you hear a lot about it. But that's one of the things that the truth embargo does. Since the truth embargo deliberately prevents a cohesive and fulsome engagement of the issue, where you can arrive at clear conclusions that are well substantiated and then move forward with that knowledge to learn other things, it basically prevents all that. And so what it leaves you in a state of constant ambiguity and uncertainty, and almost any theory or any concept can be tossed out there and has to be considered. In other words, it just wastes a hell of a lot of time. If we ran science this way, we'd still be in the 1800s. But the United States government has a massive classified system to deal with all matters national security, and the highest classified item in that list is the UAP ET issue. Not surprisingly, in order to engage this issue, we have, as we do in many cases, drawn upon the public sector in the sense of defense contracting. We have companies that are really good at technology, and we draw upon them and cut deals with them to create that technology. Nothing shocking about that. And what are you going to do? Go into the C ring at the Pentagon and round up some people working a desk and say, look, we need to invent a new laser. No, you go to the companies that do that. Not that you don't have your own research program. And so these companies go into agreement with the government that they will help to develop technology related to national defense. And it's fully classified. In other words, the contractors are going to come under, at least that part of those contractors that's working on these classified programs are under the same level of secrecy as the government personnel dealing with it. So there's top secret clearances and so forth, and special access programs, status on both sides. Okay. So, yeah. So the government is drawing upon private corporations specializing in certain areas of technology in order to get the job done, and puts those companies, or at least the appropriate part of those companies, under classification. Somehow that got manifest into, no, we just turned it all over to them. We don't have any places looking at these craft. It's all being done by Lockheed Martin or GE or whatever the hell. No. I mean, our government can be stupid, but it's not that stupid. You don't turn over you don't contract out our nuclear weapons response programs, right? In other words, when you go out to our nuclear flights where we have our ICBMs, you don't see a corporate logo out there. Those are run by the United States government, United States Air Force, and appropriately so. The ET issue is the same way. And so this is a thread that's not going to go anywhere, and it doesn't really help. Now, I will add this, that to the extent that corporations can influence government, there's a line you can cross when you start sliding into fascism. There's no question about it. And there's nothing shocking about that. Every capitalistic system that has ever emerged has always had to dance with fascism. There's elements of it in every democratic capitalist country right now in the world, even at this advanced time, that 21st century. The trick is, don't let it get you by the throat. Manage it, moderate it, regulate it, so you don't end up with Italy, 1940, Spain, and other versions of what we'll call fascism. Right? The United States is going through a period right now where its level of dysfunction is a lot higher than it should be. Whether it's the highest it's ever been is not clear, but boy, it's up there. Got to be in the top 5. And as a result, fascism is showing its head here and there. You're starting to feel it creeping up, and it needs to be dealt with. There's no question. But are we a fascist country? No. Are we a communist country? No. Are we currently a much too dysfunctional country? Yes. All right. But it's important to stay as close to Occam's razor and the ground as possible. So if you slip and fall, you don't kill yourself. And this is one of the things that good activism has to do. In other words, it's easy to get hyperbolic and overwrought and really loud when doing activism. Even make stuff up, right? Embellish, expand, whatever, in service to the cause. But this is a mistake. And when it happens, the cause is not served at all. In fact, it can completely undermine the cause. And so I believe in that kind of activism. And so I don't do that. I don't do that. I call it like I see it. And highly exaggerated, elaborate concepts that simply turn up out of nowhere and are going to be embraced because, well, we don't know for sure. Why not? Let's look at this. That's not how I roll. I stay as close to common sense, even when dealing with things like extraterrestrials as possible, and even assessing the United States government, which does things that I've absolutely despised my whole life, right? Very embarrassing, very troubling. It has done awful things, as has have virtually every other country in the world. But because we have so much power, our awful things tend to be a little bit more impacting, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to jump off a building or get crazy about it. This is important if you want to be an activist. If you want to be a radical, total outrageous radical, if you want to be a terrorist, extremist, well, no, you don't do this. You go the other way. But we know what comes from that. Now, with that in mind, look, the United States government controls the ET issue. The contractors involved in it in any way, shape, or form do not control it. These contractors are not preventing this from coming out. It is a political decision. It is not a corporate board decision. The decisions to run the truth embargo is done at the level of the president, one way or another. And while different presidents have known different levels, different ranges of information regarding the issue, every single president has known that it's true. Let that sink in. They've known that this phenomena is true. But whether they could do anything about it was very limited, and sometimes more limited than others, right? And so it was a political decision to initiate the truth embargo for national security reasons, and it will be a political decision to end it. And I assure you, when the time comes to end it, nobody is going to call up the head of Lockheed and ask for permission, or any other, or Battelle, or Rand, or any other private entity, whether it be profitable or nonprofit, profit or nonprofit. Right? This issue is bigger than that nonsense. There's plenty of ways that they kind of collaborate and do stuff that maybe we don't like. But when it comes to this is way too important to play that stupid game. Now, it doesn't mean that big money and billionaires can't influence politics and try to get certain people into the House and Senate. God, they do it all the time. But it's remarkable how little evidence there is at all that any of the big shot billionaires and big companies have bribed or whatever, bought politicians, or bought people rather, to get them in the House and Senate so they could screw, or rather not screw, but maintain the truth embargo. I don't think that's even on the menu in that sense. There's so many other ways that they can corrupt things without touching that, right? So keep it simple, right? The U.S. government is the principal controller. It controls the research. It uses corporations to help in that. Those corporations are also classified. And so, to the extent that fascism is been on the rise in the United States, and I believe it is, the ET issue is not a significant component of that. That's my answer to that question.
Amazing, Stephen. Thank you so much. That shed a lot of light on several issues. It's admirable to keep your ear to the ground and never forget that, as they say, you can't fight the occult with occult powers. You can't beat lies with lies. You can only beat it with the truth. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite lines from the X-Files, of which I'm a rabid fan, as I'm sure you may have guessed.
You're dating yourself, son.
was in season 3, and Scully tells Mulder when he's on his crazed pursuits for getting to the bottom of it, that listen, the truth, I agree with you, the truth is out there, but guess what, so are lies. And I think we're all on board. We can't traffic in them and expect a good outcome. But switching gears, on a question that I wanted to ask you, and I found this article from the Daily Star. It was written by Ethan Blackshaw, in which it's primarily, there's a statement there which I thought was very, very consequential to our present and our future, given the, as you mentioned, the very high likelihood of disclosure. And I'm quoting here. This is a quote from you, according to Ethan Blackshaw, published in the Daily Star .co.uk. Quote: "World economy would collapse if government UFO data was released." Warns.
Yeah, I saw that. What was the source? Who was the source for that particular statement that worked its way into the headline?
Who was the source?
What source were they relying on to put that in the headline?
It was. It was. Hold on a second, really quickly. What source were they relying on? For disclosure. 1 second. I'm trying to get to the primary. According to the website, which is paradigmresearchgroup.org, which has been pinned above here. The homepage.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that was a quote? Oh, wait a minute. That was they were quoting me there, weren't they?
Correct. Yes. It's
that's quote. A misquote. And I actually contacted the guy on that. I never said that at all. They took something else I said and misread it and stuck that in the headline. Yeah, it's bogus. I never said that. So let me clear that up right now. So what was the source? Me, but it wasn't. I have never in my entire history in this ever said the world economy collapsed. I have talked about the fact that people think that could happen and it comes up and so forth. But as an assertion, no. I happen to think the world economy will thrive post-disclosure, which is another 40-minute answer. But before I go on, let me say this to all the people that are in the room here, because I have a feeling that the people in this room are probably on the higher end of not only intelligence, but education and achievements, life achievements, and everything else. Get ready for the post-disclosure world. Start preparing now. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean have some champagne ready and toast disclosure when it happens. I mean, I'll certainly be doing that. But the world is going to change in a way and at a level and to an extent unseen in history. And everybody knows, I think most people learn, that even in high school, that great change means great opportunity. That's when the real opportunities turn up, when there's change, when there's a transition, a major transition. And so disclosure is going to generate opportunities on a scale unimaginable for those who are prepared to take action, to address it, to respond. And you can wait until it happens, right? You can be like, well, I'm busy. I'm learning the violin or whatever. I want to become a triathlete or whatever the hell you're doing in your life, which is fine. I mean, everybody's got their life, and I get that. And then if the announcement comes, well, I'll sit down and start thinking about what am I going to do about that? Let me tell you, when that announcement comes, tens and tens of millions of people are going to start trying to get through many, many doors all at the same time. It is going to be like the Oklahoma, I've used this analogy, Oklahoma land rush, which dates the hell out of me. It's when Oklahoma opened up a huge amount of territory, which of course was taken from the Indians, Native Americans, and created this deal where on a certain day, you have to be at a certain place and we'll shoot the gun and you get to race off and get to some area that you can then claim a certain amount of acreage and it's yours. But you have to, you can't do ahead of time. It's a race. It's going to be the land rush, right? I don't know whoever came up with this idea. It's the stupidest idea ever. And so thousands of Conestoga wagons and people on horses were all lined up and they shot the thing and off they went. And it was chaos. You've got people stumbling in front of the wagons and getting killed, horses falling over and dying, all kinds of matter. It's insane. Oklahoma land rush. This is going to be way bigger than that, but without the Conestogas and the horses, right? And so if you want to be involved in the post-disclosure world in a meaningful way, if you want to take advantage of the opportunities that will come open, you need to start thinking about it now. Actually, you needed thinking about it a couple of years ago, but hey, and I've been saying the same thing for a couple of years, right? But nevertheless, it's never too early. It could happen this year. It could happen within months, which is why I've initiated trying to develop my own hashtag. My hashtag, it's trademarked, I think. Probably not. Hashtag months, not years. Very simple. I've had so many people tell me, it's decades, Steve. It'll never happen. It's years and years from now. You've been saying it's going to happen for years. It's years and years and years. Well, now it's months. We're in the end game. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be put off, delayed. Sure. If Vlad the Impaler drops a couple of tactical nukes into Ukraine, things are going to get real bad real soon. Or if Xi Jinping decides that he wants to have a legacy as awful as Vladimir Putin's, he'll invade Taiwan. And I assure you the disclosure process will be tabled again. So it's not guaranteed, but barring these kinds of things, we're in the end game. And the next thing that will confirm this, that you want to pay close attention to, is really a simple thing. A committee of the U.S. Congress, not a subcommittee, but a committee, and not just any committee. It'll be one of the Intel committees, or it'll be an Armed Services Committee, but it'll probably be the Intel Committee, the Senate Intel Committee. One of these four committees, the two Intels and the two Armed Services, is going to make a simple announcement that as of a certain date, on a certain date, they will convene a hearing on the UAP issue to take testimony from military people who have information relevant to the subject. We call them witnesses. Some people incorrectly call them whistleblowers. They are not whistleblowers. When you hear that, just mark that calendar date. because from the date that those hearings begin with those witnesses, you'll be able to literally count down to when the President of the United States is going to confirm the ET issue. And that could easily and should happen before the political season, the early pre-political season gets underway in the early fall, and certainly has to happen before the first primaries of the next political election, right? And so months, not years, is where we're at. So think about it. Do you want to be a part of it? How would you involve yourself in it? What kind of business would you want to get into? Do you want to be an activist? Do you want to run for office? Because let me tell you, if you've got a good handle on this issue and you can speak to it, once confirmation takes place, you should run for office if you want to be political, because you're going to be able to talk to it in ways that most everybody else can't. So just putting that little out there, put that out there for you. Okay.
Well,
Next question.
Thank you for that. That's This is now, the name of your research group is certainly starting to crystallize in the significance of its meaning. Paradigm transforming are the times that we're going to be living in. But speaking of, in terms of what we should do, thank you for the inspiration. I believe what we're going to do is go ahead and trademark #Days Not Months preemptively. Nah, I just kidding with you, Stephen.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't care. That's good. Somebody trademark it, and then whatever. But spread it around. I mean, you all on Twitter, use it. Put it into your tweets and just start. Let's give it some life. Maybe it'll trend. And it's all about trending now. If you're not trending, you might as well just give up. Go ahead.
Definitely. So, just switching gears here a little bit, because I came across another, it's from Mother Jones, and it was an article published in March and April 2016 issue by AJ Vicens or Vicens.
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 AJ Vicens.
And
Good guy.
I'm quoting, Bassett's turning point came in 1995 when he read Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens by the late Harvard psychiatry professor John Mack, who counseled people to claim to have had contact with aliens, unquote. So, and then this is just some spitballing here, right? Out of the blue kind of question. Do you think the CIA is staging alien abductions?
CIA?
Or the intelligence community at large?
Yeah. This is a pretty big question. This is one of the one of the reasons that this whole disclosure process has got to be done in a proper way now. I mean, it's not just, hey, let's just hold a press conference and announcement. No. There are so many issues and awkward aspects to this, and so many entities who are going to have to answer so many tough questions, and so much distrust on the part of the American people, and generally the people in the world, but particularly the American people on this issue, that you got to do it right. And so the process we're seeing, and I've said this countless times, here we go again, is not the United States government just recently learned that because of the New York Times article that there was something that going on that they didn't understand, and so now they're going to set up this and have probe and do this and take reports and whatever. That is not what's going on. They're doing all of this because they know the truth embargo's days are numbered. And that means they're going to have to get to a confirmation from the president. And they want to go about it in a way that will be constructive, helpful, transparent, and mitigate the pain that they're going to have to undergo when a whole lot of really tough questions are going to be asked, right? And one of these questions, I would say this particular question. Now it'll be asked after disclosure. I mean, you can ask it before disclosure, but you're wasting your time. After disclosure, yeah, it's going to be asked. Did the United States government, through either military service or an agency, including the CIA, did any aspect of the United States government, in an effort to try to find out what in the hell the extraterrestrials were telling the humans that they were how would you say, giving command performance requests to appear before them and deal with them in various ways? Did they set up a program where they could take someone, interrogate them using highly sophisticated drugs, find out what they knew, inculcate in them the idea that they had actually been abducted by ETs, by whatever way they want to do it, putting on costumes, I don't know. Did that happen? It's been said that if it happened, it was part of a program called MyLabs. And that's kind of the meme, MyLabs. It might have been called that. It might have been called something else. But let's just say it's MyLabs. This is not a question they're going to be comfortable answering. It's bad. Is it worse than the Tuskegee experiments? You know, when they killed people of color, in order to learn some scientific knowledge, meaning they went full, what's his name? What was that Nazi doctor? Yeah, when they went full Mengele, maybe not. But it's very possible that they did this. Now, one of the reasons why that that theory is out there is because amongst the hundreds of thousands of accounts that have been provided by contactees, abductees, did I mention hundreds of thousands? Something that turns up, let me turn that off, get rid of it. Something that turns up is situations where contactees are somewhere in a ship or in a facility, and they see ETs, but they also see military. They see U.S., what seems to be men in U.S. military uniforms as well as ETs in the same room. That's interesting, right? I mean, that raises the prospect of humans or our government working in concert with ETs. Now, that's an even tougher question, right? In general, but in concert with ETs to do abductions, oh man, that's a public relations nightmare. But it's complicated because the ETs, as we know, at least if you're paying attention, have the ability to make you see what they want you to see. And so if an ET wants you to see a full bird colonel, right, in dress uniforms, that's what you'll see. Or if they want you to see Mickey Mouse, you'll see that. And so what exactly is going on there? Don't know. But it's happened and it's been reported. And so one has to take note of that. It's a fact. Take note of, or an item of information to take note of. But there's another consideration. And that is, no one should be shocked to know or be told that there are contactees in the Air Force, or have been, or were in the Air Force, and the Navy, and the Marines, and the Army, and the CIA, and the Congress. See, one thing we know about the ETs is their engagement of private humans, or direct singular engagement of humans, is pretty democratic. I mean, you might be a waitress at a downtown restaurant, or you could be the Secretary of State. You could be a high-level person in the military. You could be somebody working the cashier at Costco. You're a contactee. And so there have always been people in government already who were contactees. Now, and that's, even recently, some of the people that came out, Jim Semivan, 3-year career in the CIA, acknowledged he's a contactee, and there's others, right? So, So in terms of that, there's two things to think about. One, surely if you are a contactee and you're working for the government in any capacity, going back as many years as you want to go, but the further back you go, the more this is appropriate. You're probably not keen on telling anybody. All right. You're just not keen on telling anybody. Meaning, I don't want the colonel to know that I'm a contactee. This is not going to help my career advancement. So that's going to contain it. However, right, in many, many agencies of our government, in order to operate, you have to take lie detector tests at various times. This is, and in CIA, you're taking them a lot, right? But believe me, there's a whole lot of lie detector tests going on in order to make sure everybody is on the up and up and they can ask any question they want. Now, the government has known about the ET presence since 47. When the government first knew that contact of the kind we call abduction or variants of contact like that were taking place is not clear, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that recent. Goes back a ways. And so the government knows that contact is taking place. And so our government is going to say, I wonder if anybody in working in government is a contactee. And so they have the ability to sort of make queries, check around, do a little internal investigation or whatever until they can find some. And if they find some people working in the Air Force, the CIA, or anywhere else that are in fact contactees, they're not going to grab them, strip them of their clearance, take them somewhere and put them in jail. They're going to say, fantastic. We need to talk with you, right? Naturally, you're under classified program now, and you're going to remain that way. And what we're going to talk to you about is even more classified, but we would certainly appreciate your help. And so the point I'm making is the government has probably had plenty of opportunity to talk with people who are being abducted who are already under classification status within the government. And they don't have to go out and grab Uncle Charlie out of a Denny's because they think he's a contactee and take him somewhere, drug the hell out of him. So, I mean, so from the standpoint of Occam's razor, I have to be circumspect about this. Nevertheless, I have colleagues that I know who are very much absolutely convinced that they have been part of an abduction program that was run by our government, not the ETs. And I'm not going to dismiss it. Because even if the government had access to its own people that were contactees, doesn't mean that some entity might see value in seeing what the civilian population was dealing with. In other words, if they're going to abduct a member of the army, fine, they might deal with that person one way. But maybe they're dealing with the civilian population differently. And then there's the matter, because women contactees have a very different set of experiences, obviously, because that's an obvious statement. But when you're talking about reproductive situations and genetics and so forth, it gets pretty interesting. And so, not as many women inside the military. It could be that they have faked or at least concocted abduction scenarios to deal with civilian women. And it's notable that by and large, the people that are coming forward and talking about military type abductions are mostly women, not men. So that's my answer to that. Obviously, I can't give a definitive answer, but I like the question because it's a perfect example of what the government is going to be facing once they confirm the ET presence, whereupon every single contactee report has now been validated, except for the few people that are insane enough to try to fake it in order to get, I don't know, some attention. And so right away, they have to deal with every relevant question to that. And that's going to be tough. And that's part of just one of the many things they face once the truth embargo ends. And one of the reasons why they're having to end it the way they do, so that people will be as disposed as possible to giving government some slack, some consideration for the actions that they've taken and not being too overwrought about it.
Well, thank you for that answer, Stephen. And I was purposely not a it was a very succinct sort of question because, as you demonstrated, I mean, you can unpack that. There's so many different, albeit speculative, um, roads that you can go down on just in trying to answer it. But there are very problematic implications there. because if it is true that this is there's they're complicit, this is happening in concert with
Yeah.
a literal extraterrestrial force, and there's so much trauma that people face from these experiences in the last years. I mean, it never leaves them. And if that is the case, I mean, what clearer sort of example could we have of a demonstration that, you know, our own government has intentionally chosen to place ourselves outside of its protection?
The government does that
And
all the time. The government frequently takes policies which essentially are damaging to the American people. They've done it many, many times. There's nothing new about that at all. We don't want them to do that. We would rather they didn't do that, but they do. There are always certainly politicians who are utterly craven and could care less what happens to any American as long as their own needs and desires are served. And there are people in the military or in the national security structures that feel that the overall protection of the many is worth the damage to the one. Okay, this is a kind of a play off of the Star Trek deal and the famous statement by Spock, but it was done in the altruistic context. There was a reverse context to that, right? And that is the many is the state and the overall population. And so if some individuals have got to pay a severe price for that, but those individuals are obviously being set outside in that instance, and then I said, outside the fundamental protection mandate of the government. So there's nothing new about this or radical. But what is relevant is that if it is true, it's going to be one of those really awkward questions that they're going to be pressured about. And post disclosure, their willingness and ability to lie is going to be a fraction of what it used to be. So they're going to have to answer it. But but the one thing you can expect with respect to the awkward questions, and there's probably 100 or so of them that are really worth addressing. It was all come down to national security. They have an out. They've always had an out. National security, national security. In other words, why are all these ICBM launch sites in my state, right? If I'm a governor or citizen of Montana, Dakota. And the answer is national security. Well, doesn't that make my state a target for nuclear weapons? If we have a war, the whole damn state's going to be obliterated. That's not good. The answer is national security. We got to put them somewhere. And I could go on and on and on. So again, in the standard context of things, it's not extraordinary. It's just another problem they have to deal with. Now, in terms of the post-disclosure world, and for those of you, who have political aspirations, one of the things I'll be emphasizing with greater frequency and intensity as we move forward, certainly at the Contact in the Desert Conference, June 2 to 4, is this. And this is not just for Americans. This is for the entire world. The way, all right, let me use a metaphor that I love that I haven't used lately. It's the old joke about the farmer and the mule. And it goes like this. There's a person cruising the country in their car, and they're driving down, and they come to a rural intersection, nothing around. And in the middle of the intersection, there's this mule cart just stopped cold because the mule is just sitting down, won't go anywhere. And he notices this and kind of slows down. And he watches as the farmer gets off the mule cart, steps off of it, goes around to the back of the cart. He pulls this fairly long, decent 2x4 out, walks around, takes the 2x4, and hits the mule a side of the head as hard as he can. And then he walks back, puts the 2x4 back on the cart, comes back around again, and goes up and whispers in the mule's ear. Then he climbs up in the cart, and the driver's watching this whole thing. And the mule gets up, and they start moving forward. And as the cart is passing the car, the driver rolls the window down and says to the farmer, he says, "Why did you hit the mule in the head with a 2x4?" And the farmer said, "Oh, that was just to get his attention." Think of the world as a mule sitting in the middle of an intersection, unable to go forward, not out of obstinance, just doesn't know what to do, conflicted, depressed, whatever the hell, and just doesn't want to go forward and can't get anything done, can't really fix its problems, and slowly everything is going to hell. Okay? And in order to fix this, the intention of the world is going to have to be accomplished. Not just a couple of people, but pretty much the whole damn world, which I now have metaphorically called a mule. How big does the 2x4 have to be to smack that mule in the head in order to get its attention? As big as disclosure. Think of disclosure as a 2x4 that's about to hit the collective head of the world's people, all 8 billion of them, at the same time. And yeah, it will get their attention, with few exceptions. And so once you have their attention, then you whisper in their ears, "Here's what we need to do." In the case of the farmer, it was, "You need to get up and we need to get, downtown because I've got some work to do." In the case of the human race, it is, "You need to decide whether you're going to fix this mess or not. Are you just going to allow things to continue where they're going, which ends very soon in calamity, meaning nuclear war, accompanied by all manner of other dysfunction and various disasters of this and that type, misery, human suffering, whatever, starvation, death, plague, but certainly the nuclear war is the piece de resistance. Are you prepared to just sit on your ass and let that happen, or is it time to finally fix this?" And so it is my belief that in the years following, how many? I don't know. Pick a number, 2, 5, 8, 10, doesn't matter. It could be 50. In the years following finally the confirmation that we are not alone in the universe, not only are we not alone, but we have company, okay, will be the greatest age of reform the human race has ever seen and maybe will ever see. You will see reforms and changes, adjustments, movements, and there's a more likely than not, these will be positive. These will be appropriate, constructive, meaning we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. So you get rid of nuclear weapons. Okay, that's the logical thing. These things are a danger. We get rid of them. That problem solved. That kind of stuff. That kind of constructive stuff. I can go on about this all day long, but I think you've got the point. So if the greatest reformist era is coming in history, the opportunities are enormous to be part of that. If you want to fix the world, here's your chance. Now, you want to hook up with other people and organizations. You want to come together, form new organizations. Don't try to go, to be a lone ranger here. But the opportunity to be part of this is coming. I invite people to consider it, and when it happens, decide and say yes. Yeah, it sounds like I'm giving a commencement address. I've been speculating or fantasizing for years that my college, my alma mater, would one day call me up and say, "Steve, we really appreciate what you've been doing, and we'd like you to come and give the commencement address to the class of 2024, 5, 8, 9, 10. And if I ever give that, this is practice. All right. But that's my point. Whatever's happened in the past, a change is coming. Let's get involved in the future and fixing the problems, not endlessly going over and agonizing over the past.
That's a very hopeful picture for sure, and that's definitely something that we can all hold strong to in inspiration. I guess the specific point I was trying to make is what makes this distinct is that um, rather than some sort of contained internal and self authorized autonomous um, betrayal of the people. It would be the first, well, perhaps not the first time, but a very stark example of literal, actual cooperation with external forces that seek to wage war against us. And one of the, in fact, perhaps we can quickly go here. I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Dr. David Jacobs,
Yes.
and with the what is it at this point, 1,200 plus people that he's worked with in hypnotherapeutic terms, to put together the the core sort of representation of what the abduction experience looks like. What are the common elements? One of the things, to your point, when you mentioned that, well, of course there are contactees and abductees in the ranks of the military and in the ranks of the intelligence community, because they're everywhere.
That's right.
They're in there among our school teachers and baristas and programmers and lawyers and they seem to make no distinction. They're very egalitarian
Well, except
about
in one way.
their
Except
targets,
in one way.
and
There is one thing that is what we'll call a significant selective component. It's not the only one. And this is important. Genetics, right? In other
interesting.
words, they work, we know whether not what I don't know if it's exclusive, but it is very prominent. They work genetically. In other words, father to daughter to son to daughter and so forth, the grandson, the great grandson. In other words, they go down through the genetic heritage, which still creates a rather broad spectrum of lives. In other words, the daddy may be in the military, but the son may end up becoming a musician, and then his son may end up being a tennis player, whatever. But they're because they're staying in the genetic lineage, you're getting people of all walks of life. You following me here? Okay,
Mhm.
that is the
And
only component. Beyond that, I do not know. We
indeed,
we
and
know that is
Doctor
true.
and David Jacobs also makes this point that it's intergenerational.
That's
It's
right.
intergenerational. It's surreptitious, as in it's a secretive sort of operation, and it's global. But however, it's the reason. So because this, I remember this one time, I forget exactly who was interviewing him, but he was being interviewed on a podcast, and he was asked a question from the audience, in which they said, "Well, hey, are all of the people who are in our halls of power, right? Our politicians, our presidents, are CEOs of corporations, et cetera, are they the ones who are like?" And then this goes into the hybridization aspect of things, and that's a whole another can of worms.
Well,
Um,
it's a pretty empty can. I mean, the statement is
uh,
all the people that are in power and high end.
well,
No.
if I may really I'm gonna quickly crash my spaceship here, so to speak,
Okay.
on the question, which is that one thing that he said, which I thought was super interesting, is that no, and he echoed the same sentiment that you just made, and but he added and said it's because they don't care, like they're not our structures of power, of government, of economic organization are irrelevant to them. Like they're very convinced it's they've got a goal in mind, and it's not going to be our world. It's not going to be our structures of societal organization or institutions or power structures of any sort.
Yeah.
It's going to be their world, which means that we're at war, literally.
Uh huh. Well, is your question is what do I think about that? Let me simply say this. I respect David Jacobs. He paid heavy dues to do his work. It did not make his life any easier, and he made major contributions. But he's come to conclusions that I don't agree with. And where to begin? First of all, because of the truth embargo, which meaning the government denies the issue, which prevents a proper engagement of the issue to achieve understanding, but has actually undermined the issue. And then combine that with the fact that increasingly more and more people every year, millions every year more around the world, realize or come to realize that this phenomenon is absolutely true, but the government continues to deny it. So that's a huge lie, which just eats away at their confidence in the government. So that's you have collapse of confidence in government. It's been going on for some time. Right. And then, so you come, and then, and that means that our understanding of the ET issue is compromised. We don't know all that we should know. And so it just opens up for wild speculation. So, but I'm not condemning those who speculate, even wildly. I get it. There has been some crazy stuff that's gone down. Some of it is kind of ridiculous. There have been people that have faked stuff, gone nuts, all of that. I don't really blame them. The fundamental culprit here is the United States government policy of embargo, a national security policy, right? I don't blame all the young men that went to Vietnam, Cambodia, for that awful thing. I blame the government that sent them there, meaning the politicians that sent them there. Same thing with this, right? I do not blame people that wildly speculate on this issue. I blame the government that has created a situation where speculation was going to be emphasized and pretty much all that we had to go with, because we can't really get the facts. Right? So let's just take one of your points. Yes, they are doing genetic work. They don't serve cookies and milk and provide massages, and it's not like a spa visit. I mean, it's tough and it's traumatic. Our government does plenty of things which are tough and traumatic to people. So the ETs are like that, and they're able to do that. But that's not good, and it does some harm. To conclude, though, that they care absolutely nothing about us, that their only interest in us is utterly purely self-serving and nothing else, limited to basically research, and that's it. We don't care what happens to you. That doesn't fit with the facts, right? What are the facts? Some of the facts. If all they do is want us for experiments or to replace us or just deal with us in whatever crude ways and could give a flying fig what happens to us, why would they go to the trouble of turning off our nuclear weapons frequently? Not once, not twice, but a number of times. Total number, not known, because in some cases we think the government locked that down before it could get out of hand, or the witnesses haven't come forward. Not only here, but in the Soviet Union. What would be the point of that? Now, some people would say it's to send a message that we're all powerful. Don't screw with us. They don't need to send that message. We knew that early on. We knew early on, you don't screw with the ETs. We stopped shooting at them long ago. And any reasonable scientists know the power they have, particularly if they're interstellar. And so they don't need to hammer that point home. And so you have a lot of witnesses to that. Men that were there when these missiles were turned off that have come forward. Some of them sadly are dying because the truth embargo has outlasted them. And most of them have come to the same conclusion that I have, and I respect their opinion better than mine, is that they're turning those missiles off to send a message. Why do you have them? If you're keeping them around because you think that somehow that's going to make you safe from us, you're nuts. There's nothing that can make you safe from us. We're interstellar beings. We're 1,000 years ahead of you, 2,000 years, pick a number, but not too big because it gets ridiculous. And so we can do things you can't imagine. Some of them are not even difficult. So if you're thinking that, you're making a mistake, which brings up a point that I'm going to emphasize strongly in my lecture at the Contact in the Desert in June. One of the really important questions that every journalist, every politician and wannabe politician, and to some extent every citizen, really needs to ask themselves and ultimately ask the government as soon as possible, but obviously it's not quite going to go anywhere right now, is this, and it's actually very, very simple. Is the reason that all of the efforts to effectuate the reduction of nuclear weapon stashes and the risk of nuclear war to a level that was clearly effective? We had 80 some thousand at one point, and now we're down to about 25. Is that effective? No, because you only need about 1,000 and that to end the ballgame, right? So no, it didn't really change anything at all. It just meant that there was less weapons stockpile. Of course, they all had to be destroyed. That cost a fortune, whatever. And so, and then there's been no significant non-proliferation efforts at all for decades. It's almost been completely shelved, which is insane. That's like having a house on fire and saying, look, I've thrown some water on it, but I think I'm going to go and, I don't know, take a couple of days off and get back to this house fire in a few days. That's stupid. Is it possible that the reason the major powers will not follow through and eliminate at least this mutual assured destruction Damocles sword that we live under is because they've all either implicitly or explicitly decided that because of these ETs being here, we need to keep a decent number of these weapons, right? We can't give that as the reason, so we'll just say the usual stuff. Hey, Russia's got them. We got to have them. North Korea's got one. The Muslims may get one. Whatever the hell reason you have to refer to, just use that. Hey, got to have these weapons. But in fact, the main reason could be that they feel we just got to keep these weapons because you never know. We might need to use them against the ETs, which is unfortunately false thinking. It's a classic example of military thinking. I get it, and one could even justify it based upon the standard procedures and what have you, but this isn't standard at all. We're not dealing with another country. You're talking about a civilization, not one, but several, and they're interstellar. And so if that is the reason, think about what a colossal mistake that is. Keeping thousands of nuclear weapons stockpiled, putting them on advanced submarines and making them hypersonic and doing all of that because you can't get rid of them. And the reason you can't get rid of them is because you think you're going to need them against the ETs when they will be utterly useless against the ETs. You see the logical problem here, right? It is a logical fallacy of existential and global proportions. And so that is something I'm going to be bringing up and putting out there to the fine journalists that will undoubtedly ignore me, because it is a huge question. Is the presence of ETs in any way relevant to why we insanely keep weapons that can end our civilization that has taken about 2 billion years to achieve? Going back even before life, but just the overall evolution of the planet and all that. I mean, all of that had to happen for us to be here. I mean, that's a whole lot of time and effort and work, that we're going to basically throw down the drain. Pretty significant question. But in terms of, so the ETs, get back to it, I don't know exactly what they think of us. I do know that they have told a lot of contactees what they think, believe it or not. And when they tell you, they think it to you. And many contactees have received rather positive and somewhat even, nice sentiments. Okay, they get images put in their heads. So it's like a movie, right? So it like plays out in their head. They don't actually use like 73-inch Samsung TVs or anything. And basically just play the damn thing in your head. It's the ultimate in 4K technology. And these messages are relatively consistent. They show the effects of environmental damage, disasters caused by environmental events, and they'll show the effects of war. Now, many of the contactees believe they're actually showing a future that they know is coming, that they're time travelers. I'm not on that plane. I don't fly that logic at all. I don't think it's true. I think it's false. They're not showing them an actual future that they've been through or they know about. They're showing them a likely future. We do that all the time. The movie 2012 was not a projection of a known future. It was simply a fictional account of a possible future. All right, that's what they're being shown. Why would they do that? These extraterrestrials have the capability to assess our destination, where we're going technologically and environmentally and everything else. They probably have a pretty good idea where we're headed if we don't change our ways, just like some parents know pretty much where their 14-year-old's headed. If he doesn't get his act together, he's going to end up in prison or worse. So is it they're telling us these things because they would prefer we didn't do that? So if they don't want us to destroy ourselves with war or destroy the planet, that is not the sign of callous beings who don't give a shit about what happens to us. So you see, it's just not that simple. And I get why people who only have a limited amount of time to address this issue and understand its history are going to arrive at this conclusion or that conclusion. David Jacobs is one researcher of many. The total number of contactees out there is in the millions. So if he's interviewed 1,200, that's 1% of 1% of 1% of the total number of contactees. Again, totally respect the guy. I hope he's wrong. If he proves to be right, well, the future is going to be a little more, how would you say, challenging than we would like.
Wow, that was quite the take.
I have no short
I'm
answer.
sure we're all gonna wanna we're all gonna wanna sit on this and digest it well later, perhaps repeatedly. But that brings me to was perhaps my final question to you,
Okay.
and it's a rather personal and emotional one. I do agree with you that everything that we've done and our government has done, and we are we've signed off on it. Whether it's due to the abdication of our vigilance and involvement, or otherwise. I don't believe that it will be without reckoning. So one way or another, I do hope, and I believe I would be speaking for the vast majority of people in this room, is that this empire, this American empire of military deception and terror that has been exerted on the rest of the world will end in one way or another, or hopefully in a transformative way, due to this paradigm shift to which you're referring. But in order to prime this next question that I'm going to ask, this is a quote from President Eisenhower's farewell address. Yeah. And I quote here now: "This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, and yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, our resources, and livelihood are all involved, and so is the very structure of our society. Now, on that note, and I ask this as no hater of my nation, only as a heartbroken citizen, to confront what I believe is this accumulated betrayal trauma from having trafficked in so many lies surrounding this issue, which is why these terms that you use, the um, secrecy reform, and the truth embargo that it can end, I feel are very consequential, because what is your expectation that we will ever be able to regain trust in our government, trust in our society? Because I feel that the collective, intergenerational, nearly half a century long, more than half a century long betrayal trauma from this has had a mighty toll on our collective national psyche. And I fear to think what would happen if it does not receive healing in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let me begin with this. Eisenhower, that statement, the final, his farewell address, and a couple other things he did very last days of his administration, statements he made, some of the most important statements of the 20th century. His farewell address is a incredibly significant speech, and it's worth noting that when he made it, he well knew that there was an extraterrestrial presence, and he well knew that the truth embargo was already underway, and that it was fully classified, thus giving our national security structures twice as much reason to be secretive and aggressive. You had ETs and you've got Soviet Union. He knew that. So he knew that those two things alone would empower good people to build a massive military intelligence complex. Good people to do it and feel justified in it. Very, very, very significant. The other thing I want to say is this. Yeah, I've had my American hating moments. Believe me, plenty of them. Mostly not because so much of how awful something was, because there are many, many nations that have done that or worse. But because it was, in our case, I think, a greater a betrayal of our values than in some of these other cases, other nations and other actions. And that betrayal is as much of my source for my anger than the actual act itself. Which gets me to this point. I think everybody in the room is going to agree to this. Nobody gets through this life without trauma. And whatever trauma you've been through, somebody's had worse. And we recognize that. And I think an adult person understands that. And if so, they act accordingly. And one of the lessons of life that is mentioned from time to time, and it's a good one, and it's very true. How your life goes is less a matter of the trauma you experience, whatever it is, and more about how you deal with it. You have men who go to the same war and have the same basic experience the trauma of it, right? At least it is a trauma. One comes back to the United States and his life absolutely, he never recovers. His life is awful. He lives out 30 years, but it's nothing but pain and degradation, no accomplishment, misery, and whatever else. Another one comes back and ends up being a member of the House of Representatives, or running a company, or having a wonderful, happy life and a family. The only difference between the two is how they responded to it. Now, how people and why people respond differently to trauma is complicated, but it has to do with your early upbringing and other fundamentals. Okay, and everybody has different life, different experiences as children, and so you are more or less able to deal with that trauma. However, we are still rational human beings with the act of being able to make choices. And so, regardless of what your life was like before the trauma hit, you still have the ability to maybe make a choice and say, okay, this is what's happened. What am I going to do with it? Well, guess what? It's the same for countries. Every nation, particularly big ones, right? And it's also, and this applies to nations that are gone and empires that are no longer with us. But let's just talk about now. Every nation out there has been through some serious trauma, done terrible things, had terrible things happen to them. And the future of that country is going to be more about how it deals with the trauma than what the trauma was. I know that sounds maybe, way too simplistic. In other words, the Vietnam War was a trauma on the American people. And how America went forward after that was not about how awful the war was, but how we dealt with the trauma that war induced in our society. And it was the same for the Iraq War. And it's the same for many other things that have happened in our nation and corruptions and what have you, all of that. These are traumas that the body politic is experiencing. These are national traumas. A perfect example of this, and there's no better example than this, is that on 9/11 of 2001, the United States as a whole, as a nation, experienced an enormous trauma. Everybody remembers it. Most people remember where they were. I was woken up by a friend who said a plane has crashed into one of the World Trade Centers. And my answer was, well, some idiot pilot got drunk and it's a big building and they hit it, and I went back to sleep. And then I got called by that same person later, and not much later, and said a plane has crashed into the Pentagon. And in that instance, I realized, no, this is terrorism. Boy, this is really not good. I got up and watched the television for the next 3 days and watched those buildings come down 1,000 times. I developed a gastrointestinal problem that stuck around for 7 months. No test could find anything wrong, but I simply, my stomach just wasn't working. It was an absolute traumatic, stress-induced situation. Okay. We had this tremendous trauma. But what happened next, what was most important, was not how bad was it, how many people were killed, how many buildings fell down, but how we responded to it that was going to determine the fate of our country, or at least how our country was going to proceed. And we made a colossally bad response. We could have, right, addressed the matter in the most specific terms possible, seeking out as carefully as possible, and even taking some time to find out who was behind it, and then specifically targeting that group or person, right? Letting it be known we were going to get satisfaction and justice, but we were going to minimize collateral damage. We could have done that, and we would have become the heroes of most of the nations of the world. We would have been endued with compassion and appreciation and respect. Instead, we concocted a bogus reason to go in and create mass slaughter throughout the Middle East, destroying whole cities and nations and creating wars that would last decades. So the fate of the United States, or at least the course of the United States, was far less about what happened on 9/11, but how we responded to it. We cannot keep doing that. And so I'm going to leave you with this, something I'll be talking about again and doing Q&A, extensive Q&A in Indian Wells in June 2024. Contact in the Desert. There's a paradox that I live, at least in my head. There's a paradox that rattles around in my head, and it goes like this. I know enough. Ignorance, by the way, is bliss. Be assured that is still true. I know enough to know that the problems that we face now have escalated and expanded in the last 30 or 40 years alone to far surpass our seeming capacity to deal with them. We are over our heads. We are out of our league. We are ahead of our skis. And we are facing transitions and issues that we simply cannot deal with based upon our worldview and the circumstances of the world today, diplomatically, politically, whatever. The way people think and behave and the way governments act, we cannot deal with these problems, and we are screwed. And just one of those problems is nuclear proliferation and the risk of a nuclear war. I happen to believe that under the current course that we're on, it's inevitable, absolutely inevitable. And barring something dramatic happening, it's absolutely going to happen. Now, that's kind of tough. Okay? That's a kind of tough thing to carry around in your head. Here's the paradox. I intellectually also believe this. There is not a single problem in this world or a single problem the United States faces that can't be fixed. Not only that, but the fix that's necessary is known. We know what the problems are. We know how to fix them, and they are theoretically fixable. Wow. So that's talk about your cognizant dissonance. I carry those two things around in my head all the time. And so, wait a minute. Okay, well, what's the punchline here? Okay, I mean, you're just going to be cognitively dissonant the rest of your life? No. The only thing that makes the second not achievable right now is the will to act, right? In other words, human beings and nations know what the problems are, know how to fix them. They do not have the will to do it, or enough collective will to do it. And so everybody just kind of mingles and stirs around and goes about their business with a sense of inevitable doom, which is why we're so taken up with apocalyptic movies and television shows and books. We can't get enough of them. And messianic movies, right? With Deus Ex Machina endings and messiahs, which is basically what all the Marvel characters and DC characters are all. They're all messiahs. That's why we're so obsessed with this. Here is the key point that you need to get. In order to get the will, you've got to have a worldview change on a broad scale. You have to have not just one, not 1,000, not 1,000,000, but at least 1 billion or more people, or several billion people in this world have a significant change of worldview. And if you can get that worldview change, and it's in the right direction, the right type, suddenly the will to fix what we know can be fixed is there, and you fix it. And guess what? We have one thing on the menu. It's a menu of one, right? There's only one thing on the menu to pick if that's where you want to go. There are no other items on this menu. Nothing on this menu but this. Confirmation of the extraterrestrial presence to the world's people, formally by every head of state, certainly followed up with ample amount of evidence and information which drives that point home. That event will be the most profound event in human history, and it will have an impact on worldview sizable enough to achieve that state that I talked about, the will to fix it. Nothing else is going to get us there in time. even if there was another option, and there isn't, except possibly the second coming of a god or the son of a god who comes down and does a lot more than just make, water into wine or multiply fishes. It will take a god or a son of God coming back, or whatever, pick a god, I don't care, that literally takes over the world and with the powers of a deity is able to fix everything. That's the concept of the Deus ex machina, God and the machine. I'm not counting on that because there's simply no evidence for that happening. So that leaves one thing: disclosure. And so disclosure, for those of you that care, is absolutely an existential matter. It is the difference between our surviving as a civilization or not. We may destroy the planet along the way, but the planet will recover. Okay? The planet's been here a long time. It'll be here millions, if not billions of years longer. It will change. It will adapt. It's been there before. It'll be here. Our civilization will not. And most of the galaxy, if not all of the galaxy, will probably not care. Though I think there will be some that care. But I care. And so this is the way to think about this. This is why this is important. This is why people have spent years and decades pursuing this. It doesn't get any more important than this. So if you have kids, and if your kids have grandkids, and you would prefer not to see a nuclear war or massive devastation from famine, flood, disease, and or technological consequences, such as AI taking all the jobs away, so everybody's living in tents, right, where they can then die from the plague, then you need to advance disclosure in any way you can and be ready to deal with it when it comes. I'd like to leave you with that, if I may. Is that okay?
Absolutely, Stephen, and thank you so much. This has been a great honor and very uplifting message from you.
Hopefully.
And yes, Lord willing, we will know the truth and it will set us free.
Good quote to end on. Hey, I hope to see some of you in Indian Wells come June 2-4. And I'm happy to come back on Clubhouse anytime to talk to any group that wants to put up with me. Fair enough?
Yes, thank you so much, Stephen. And where could people get access to that event? Is that we could get access to that through your
Well,
website?
you just either Google the words "contact in the desert" or go to contactinthedesert.com, and you got
Awesome.
it right there. Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Alrighty.
All right, so if you guys enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll catch you on the flip side.